Well, thank you, Christian. It's just wonderful to see all your faces as I sit here and we begin this 1 hour conversation from our different points, on the globe. And the title today is, for me, it's just a thrilling thing because I know what prompted Mavis to say this. The title is Don't Ever Get Used to the Miracles. And it's a wonderful mystery. And I wanted to just share a little bit with you about Mavis from my perspective. Certainly, you'll be interested to know that for nearly 40 years, she has been involved as a licensed social worker, master's degree, in terms of coaching, way back, counseling, education, and consulting services. And she hails from my state, Minnesota, but many globally have known Mavis in some interesting ways. She's been around for long enough that she knows about you, and she's written things that other people have picked up and passed around the world, sometimes without knowing or contacting Mavis. So as we begin today, I want to just tell you my reason for suggesting to Christian that it would be wise to have some time set aside to learn and be with Mavis is that Mavis had my back. And Mavis, you didn't even know it. When I was first learning the principles in the mid-90s, and it happened that my husband of 28 years died suddenly. I always knew, because I was participating in the local networking meetings with you and others, that if I really needed some professional support, you were there, actually in the same suburb that I was living in, and I could have gone into your office and had services that I would definitely trust. But just your presence at these meetings, the things that I read that you had written were very encouraging to me, very trustworthy, and they were also things that supported me as an individual who was in a life crisis. And sometimes we don't know the power of a person who stands firmly rooted in the genuine understanding, I'll say, of the teachings now called the principles, in probably a pretty fundamental, original way that Sid Banks was communicating those. So welcome, Mavis. And as we begin today, I'm wondering, and I see you wrinkling up your face, I know what that means, but as you begin to have conversation with me today, yeah, I know, has an insight or something come to you that you might want to share and preface with folks as we start, and then I'll proceed with questions and things we've chatted about. But what's on your heart at the moment?
Well, your introduction for one thing, so I'll see if I can get by that. Well, sometimes I think I'm kind of running a scam. I'm proud of the scam. It's a good scam, but I'm kind of basically teaching people something they innately know. They may not know they know it, but they know it. And then I charge them a lot of money for that. And I'm not ashamed of that. When people walk into my office or into my life in any way, they may think that there's something terribly wrong with them. And I already know there isn't, but they don't. And my job is really just to see who people really are, and if they're interested, I'll help them see that too. And it's a real privilege to pass this on to people. It's I feel like I won some kind of cosmic lottery or something, that this is what I get to do. So right now that's where I'm at. I'm just really grateful I get to do this.
Well, the cosmic lottery, you got picked today. And I'm going to ask Christian, are we actually picking up Mavis in speaker view? Yes, thank you. Okay.
Yeah, sorry, I just had to unmute myself.
Totally fine. Mavis, you talk about the gift of being able to serve people. And in doing that, you're simply letting them know what you already know they have and are, that they're well, that they're whole. How did you first encounter learning this? I'll, for now, call it learning the principles, but you use the terms in the way you wish to do this.
First of all, I don't call what I do anything. I've been around long enough, so I've gone through lots of names of it. I don't know if this is the right order, but neocognitive something or other, and psychology of mind, and maybe something else in there, and now the three principles. But I just don't call it anything. Really, it's because I think it's too big for a name. It doesn't, there's no name big enough for it. So I always kind of felt like when I was calling it something, I was making it too small. So that's just this individual thing I have. I don't call it anything. When I first was introduced to this information, it was probably somewhere between 35 and 40 years ago. And it was at a workshop at the University of Minnesota. If I remember right, it was in the Graduate School of Psychology, but that may not be accurate. But anyway, there were 3 PhD psychologists from Florida, Roger Mills, whom you probably all have heard of, Rick Suarez, and Kimberly Cadu. And the only reason I went is that my buddy Joe Bailey said I should go. And the place that I worked with had a lot of money for training. It was called the Bridge for Runaway Youth. And so the best part of going, as far as I knew, was that I got 3 days off work, which was great, and I got paid for it. But when I went, I didn't really know what to expect. And about maybe an hour or so into it, I thought the top of my head was going to come off. And what I heard was, oh my God, it's our thinking. And I really couldn't get beyond that. I just went, what? It's our thinking. Because I was trained, like most other people in graduate and undergraduate, to examine what we're thinking and why we're thinking it and who taught us to think that and how long have we thought that, and for heaven's sakes, don't think that way, think this way, and then to take those thoughts that people have and find a little category to put them in and diagnose them and tell them that's what's the problem. And then I was supposed to feel really good about that now we knew what was wrong. But nobody ever told me how to help people be happy. Nope, I never had a class on what happiness was, ever. And I hadn't even realized that until that day. And I thought, oh my God, now what I'm going to do? I can't go back to work and talk about things in the same way. I can't do it. So I thought, well, that's the end of my job. I'm going to, what am I going to do? But that turned into an adventure, because I showed up at my job Monday morning and I had a full schedule of families to see with their runaway kids. And so I just started out the first one saying, Okay, I learned something over the weekend that makes it impossible for me to keep working with you in the same way. And I'd be glad to really refer you to someone else because I just can't do it. And nobody let me go. I don't understand that. And they kept saying, well, what? What did you learn? And I said, well, um, it's about our thinking. And they kept waiting for more. I couldn't think of anything more. I couldn't. It was my first experience that I know of where I really understood something, but I could not explain it and I didn't know how to think about it. And long story short, the families I was seeing didn't care about that. They kept asking me questions and it no longer felt like I was a therapist with some people that I was fixing. It felt like a bunch of people trying to figure out, me included, what it was that happened. And that went on and on. I tell you, it was like um, sitting out on the end of on the far end of a branch on a great big tree, hoping I wouldn't fall off, but knowing that's where I was supposed to be. And it went on until my clients helped me find ways to explain it. They said, well, is it like this? Is it like that? And, there weren't any books about it then. And I found some workshops later and then met Sid and all of that. But what a time that was. And all I was doing was thinking, great, 3 days off work. My whole life changed. But I do want to tell you, I kept I kept trying to find reasons why it wasn't true. Because I don't kind of just take things right away and just say, okay, that's the answer. I knew it was, but I wanted to prove it to myself. So I kept saying, well, what about this? And what about that? And I threw things like that at it for months. And I couldn't break it. I couldn't find a hole in it. So here I am. Go ahead.
A lifetime later.
Yeah.
Sharing, discovering.
Yeah. Well, learning myself. My teachers are still my clients.
Your teachers are your clients.
Yeah.
Yeah. So when you began to have some, I'll just say successes, or see your clients having successes, and you would be with folks who were also learning, maybe in conferences or other meetings, tell us how you end up with this title today. Don't ever get used to the miracles. Where on earth does that come from?
That was your idea. You got that from us.
Well, but you said it, my dear.
Yeah.
It came out of your mouth.
It did. I know. I'll take it.
Well, passed out of your mouth. We'll say it that way.
Sid came to town. Sid Banks came to town. He came quite often to do workshops, and I got to know him. And we were at lunch one day, and he knew at that time that I was doing this project with gang kids in prison, that I would go down to a prison near where I live, Red Wing, and teach this to a bunch of kids. And I had a blast. There's all kinds of stories about that. But anyway, he had heard that and he said, tell me stories. And so I tell him stories. And I knew he liked stories, but he'd never asked me that before. So, okay, well, so I started telling him some ways that kids had learned this and what they'd done with it. And to me, they were funny kid stories and sweet kid stories. And I must have been kind of matter of fact about it, because Sid reached over and he took my arm and he said, don't ever get used to the miracles, dearie. And I thought, oh, they kind of are miracles. And I hadn't respected them enough to see it that way. I was just going around doing my work and hanging out with the kids. And I hadn't seen how powerful it was. And that was good for me.
That's powerful. Yeah. You knew Sid in other ways too.
Pardon me?
You knew Sid in some other kinds of ways too. We'll have you come back and tell these stories in a minute, but when you're around him, what did you notice? What was that like?
Well, I'm going to tell you a funny story. One of the best things that ever happened to me is he and I and a couple of other people were going somewhere in a car someday, and he got really mad. I don't know who he was mad at or why he was mad at, but he was ranting and raving and carrying on. And I was sitting in the back seat going, holy cow, Sid's in a bad mood. I hadn't seen him in a bad mood before. And I thought, whoa, that is a temper. And I was so relieved. I thought, oh, he gets in bad moods too. Now, I had never gotten such a loud one before, but it was amazing. And I had on and off, I saw that again. So that was really helpful to me. It helped me forgive myself when I would forget what I know. I go, okay, everybody forgets. And everybody behaves badly sometimes when they believe their worst thinking. And even Sid. So I let myself off the hook because I and probably a lot of other people thought I had to be perfect if I was going to teach this, that I couldn't express or show or even have any bad habits. Well, that got rid of it. It's like, no, being a human being is good enough. And I'm going to try and be the best one I can. And Sid is one of the best ones I know. And when he is on, he is astonishing. It's like there's a bunch of light and warmth and love and humor. When he's off, he's just a pain. But so am I. So am I. I found out.
Mavis.
I found out that not everybody thought his bad moods were bad moods, and I kind of entertained that for a bit and thought, well, is his bad moods different somehow? And after giving it some consideration, I thought, no, they're not. So, but I didn't have any conversations about that. I just went about my business.
Yeah. Share a couple of stories that you had kind of treasured over the years from working with students, clients, maybe things that happened to catch Sid's eye, but more importantly, what really stands out in your heart as a couple of stories that inspire us.
Okay. I'll tell you a couple of stories about the kids. I had been going down to Red Wing for several months, and
it's a juvenile detention institution in our state.
Yeah. And so in between classes, one of the kids that had been in one of my classes for several months, and he never said anything. Kids weren't required to say anything. If they wanted to, they did. But he was a kid that came from a family that drug dealing was the business. His grandparents dealt drugs. His parents dealt drugs. He had a couple of brothers in prison for dealing, And he had been dealing since he was 10. And at this time he was 17, and he'd been in and out of other institutions. And he came up to me after class and he said, gee, they called me OG. Now, for a long time, I thought that meant old grandmother or something. I just never asked. Turns out it means original gangster.
Oh.
So anyway, he said, gee, I've been thinking. He said, I don't think people should deal drugs. And I said, really? What makes you say that? And he looked around and he said, you know, drugs hurts people. And I said, well, you're right about that. And he said, well, I don't think you should sell stuff that hurts people. And he just walked away. And he didn't know how to read. He signed up for reading classes and other classes. He was pretty good at math because he had to keep track of his drug stuff, but he got a GED when he was in prison and got out and got a construction job and got married and had a little boy last time I heard. But he figured that out. I never chewed him out for dealing drugs. I knew what all those kids were in for, but my job wasn't to tell them to quit doing that. My job was to teach him how to become uninterested in doing that. So he was awesome. He was one of my heroes.
I love that. My job was to teach them to become uninterested in that. It's just going so much deeper.
Yeah, well, you can imagine how many people had tried to talk him out of dealing drugs since he was 10. Cops and parole officers and teachers, not many teachers, he wasn't in school long enough, but he just thought they were trying to ruin his business. So that was never going to work. So another time, the kids had to, when they got out on parole, they had to come and see me for a while too. And they protested, but they didn't want to go back to prison, so they came to see me. So one day I had about 18 of them, like 18 or 19 of them in my conference room in my office. And I was going to start the class, and the kid next to me said, gee, could I talk? I said, sure. And he started around the room and he started pointing at each kid and he named them and he named their gang. Now, I knew their names. I didn't know their gang. I just wasn't interested in it. But he went around, he got every one of them and they'd nod. He said, you're so-and-so and you're a Crip or you're a this or you're that. And he stopped and he said, before you were my enemies, but I want you to know that I have love in my heart for you. And I was just, it took my breath away. And I thought the kids were going to laugh. I thought they were going to tease them. And they started nodding and they started talking about, in their own words, which was sometimes pretty profane, but in the power of love and what it would be like if everybody in the world knew what they knew. And they listed all the things that people wouldn't be poor and they wouldn't get killed and there wouldn't be wars and people wouldn't care what color you were. And they went on and on. I didn't say anything the rest of the class. I wish Sid would have been there. I told that story. I wanted him to hear it. I told that story when they had something for him at the University of West Virginia. And I can't, every time I tell it, I can hardly get through it, but I wanted him to know what he had brought about. I didn't tell him about the temper, but I told him about that. So,
Yeah. Did he ever meet some of those students at a?
oh yeah, I forgot that. I got a busload of them, and I brought them to one of the conferences Sid did, and I didn't know how that was going to go because they were rowdy, and but they listened and they listened, and there were like maybe 300-400 people at this thing, and during one of the breaks, I said, you know, you can go down and talk to Sid if you want. So they marched down the aisle and stood around him, and he sat for, I don't know what, half an hour or something, just talking to him and listening to him, and they were just like captivated. And I thought, oh, that's amazing. They don't listen to anybody. Well, they listen to me, but but other people. And he was so dear with them. It was just beautiful. And then at lunch, we had an hour and a half, I think, for lunch, and I brought a football along because I was a little worried. Kids with nothing to do for about a half an hour might, God knows what could happen. So I brought the football and I took it outside, and we were tossing the football around. And pretty soon, there was a whole bunch of glass in this dining room at this college, and people were seeing us, I guess. And pretty soon, a bunch of other people from the conference came out, and there was this just big football party. And these kids were so amazed that all these other people would hang out with them and throw footballs. I don't think any of them will ever forget that day. And then they had to get in the bus and go back. And but I know I talked to quite a few of them afterwards, and that stuck with them. That they were treated like there was absolutely nothing wrong with them. They weren't treated like prisoners. They weren't treated like lowlifes. And isn't that too bad that that's kind of rare?
Wow.
But I think it's our job to make sure it gets less rare and less rare and less rare.
Mavis, do you have the secret, the letter there?
You told me I had to have it, so
I did. And I'm going to just hold this up, and then we'll come back to Mavis. But for all of you, I want to just make a little comment about on the bottom of this that she'll read and talk about. It says copyright 1999, Mavis Karn. And her email is there, still same email. And I was at a conference where in the old days, we had materials that participants would bring and exchange or give away, or in some cases, have a small charge for. It was, anything. Anybody in the conference could bring something. And I remember paying $10 for this. And it was important because it was copyrighted. It totally fit my needs working with young people. And today, this is one of the things in the out in the world, even on the internet, that is circulated very, very broadly. And so I want to just ask Christian a favor. If people send you some kind of an email after this, and if you can find a way to let them be in contact with Mavis, if you can, we'll figure that out, because she was very generous to give me permission to have her original form, this great big, see how big it is? Poster, reproduced with permission, and I've used it probably for 25 years, or whatever it is from then till now. So I want you to just have an opportunity to hear Mavis read this and tell us a little bit about how she came to together and why.
Well, this came from out of the project with the kids too. On the very last day, I did that project for 2 years, and on my very last day, they had a party for me with a big cake, and it was so cute. And before I went, I just wanted to give them something. If I had $1 million for each of them, I would have given it to them, but I couldn't think of anything to give them. What, socks? I don't know. I just could. And I thought, okay, I'm going to write a letter. And so I sat down and I wrote them a letter. And that's the poster. And it became a poster because it somehow found its way into the big guy's prison. And somebody there called and wanted to know if they could make a poster out of it. So it travels. So, dear kids and former kids, I have a secret to tell you. Nobody meant to keep it from you. It's just that it's been one of those things that's so obvious that people couldn't see it, like looking all over for the key that you have in your hand. The secret is that you are already a completely whole, perfect person. You are not damaged goods. You are not incomplete. You are not flawed. You are not unfinished. You do not need remodeling, fixing, polishing, or major rehabilitation. You already have within you everything you need to live a wonderful life. You have common sense, wisdom, genius, creativity, humor, self-esteem. You are pure potential. You are missing nothing. The only thing that can keep you from enjoying all that you already are is a thought. One thought. Your thought, not someone else's thought, your thought. Whatever thought you are thinking at the moment that feels more important to think than feeling grateful, alive, content, joyful, optimistic, loving, and at peace. That's the only thing that's between you and happiness. And guess who's in charge of your thinking? Guess who gets to decide where your attention goes? Guess who gets to write, produce, direct, and star in the moment you're in the middle of? You. Just you. Not your past, stored thought, not the future. Did you ever know that it never ever shows up? Not your parents. They all think their own thoughts. Or your friends, ditto. Or school, or television, or situations, or circumstances, or anything else. Just you. Thinking is an awesome capability. Like any capability, it can be used either as a tool or as a weapon against ourselves and others. And just like with any tool, you can tell whether you're using it for or against ourselves by how it feels. When we think against ourselves or others, we get in trouble. When we don't, we usually stay out of trouble. Feelings exist to warn us away from using our thinking to create trouble in our lives and to guide us back to our natural, healthy ability to live our lives to the fullest. So please remember that your thoughts are not always telling you the truth. When we're in low moods, feeling down, our thoughts are not to be trusted. Our IQs drop. When our thoughts pass and we lighten up, our thinking is once again creative, positive, our IQs go up. The only way you can feel badly about yourself and your life is if you think badly about them. It's up to you every single minute you're alive. It's always up to you. This is the best, most liberating secret I ever learned, and I want you to know it too. With love, me.
I love that. I think of one principal in a school who had become familiar, was learning, living, and not quite sharing what she had been benefiting from in her own life of the principals. And on a one-to-one basis, she felt comfortable talking with students at the high school level. Maybe not a staff in service that's threatening to her, maybe not with a whole group of students, but I remember her talking about a young man who had been shoplifting, and he ended up in her office And she had a deep belief, like you do, that he too was just fine, but hadn't had an opportunity to learn that. And she always kept your poster hanging on the wall. And so she reached up, pulled it down, and handed it to this young man. And she asked him to just read it to her. And she said, he quieted down and was in tears as he was reading your message. It was going straight to his heart. And it was a really significant statement, I think, about when we're wanting to share with someone else and don't always feel comfortable to know exactly how to do that, maybe in the early stages. That sometimes whatever has touched us or whoever has touched us offers something to us that allows us to take that next step in reaching yet another person. And I know this poem or letter has done that. There are many people on the call that will be very familiar with you, Mavis, with what you've written. And so I'm going to invite Christian to begin to open us up to some questions from those folks who are with us today. And then we'll come back near to closing with a couple more questions I'd like to ask you, but I'd really love, Christian, for you to make it possible for people either to raise their hand or to be totally unmuted, whatever works best for you.
Mavis, if it's all right with you, I'm going to just suggest that anyone who has a question or a comment just unmutes themselves and comes in. If you're more comfortable raising your hand, then you can do that using the raise hand function.
And
so
that bottom of the screen,
at the bottom of the screen,
the participants, they'll see, if you click that, you get the raise hand, but unmuting is wonderful. That's natural. So
yeah.
Mavis, this is Stu Webb, voice from the past.
Oh, hi. How are you, you sweet man?
I'm probably about 5 blocks from you, wherever you are. You still in Minneapolis?
No, I'm in my home in Mendota Heights.
What?
I'm in my home in Mendota Heights.
Oh, okay. Well, you're 20 miles then maybe, but it was wonderful to hear your name and to know, my God, Mavis is still at it.
Well, she's older than dirt, but here she is.
Mavis and I worked together on a number of situations, probably 20, 30, 40 years ago, who knows how many. So it was just wonderful. It was wonderful to hear your secret, because that's exactly where you've always come from. And I used to send clients over to Mavis, and they would come with in about 5 different pieces, and they'd come back with all put back together. So thank you, Mavis, for your life, for still being there, and it's such a treat to see your face.
Oh, thank you, Stu. Good to see you.
Okay, I pass. Move it on.
Thanks.
Love you.
Thanks, Stu. It's nice to see you. To see you on video, if not in person.
Mavis. Hi, it's Dickon.
Dickon!
Yeah, another voice from the past.
You have some fuzzy white stuff on your
I do. It's gravity, Mavis. It just drops down. It is so good to see you. I've been thinking a lot about you lately, and wouldn't you know then, Kathy told me the other day that you were going to be on, so I couldn't pass up the opportunity. Hey, I'm going to tell 2 stories about you very quickly.
Uh-oh.
One time we were in Massachusetts to do a training for Shackleton School for kids who couldn't make it in regular high school. And we were talking one evening at Ken Manning's house. And we were just having a wonderful talk. And you said, Dickon, isn't it nice to just hang out and see what shows up? And I tell you, that is one of the most profound statements. It sort of encapsulates everything I know. And it stayed with me all of these times. And often I just think how glorious it is to just hang out knowing nothing, and then stuff just miraculously shows up. That's delightful. So thank you for that. And the other was one time we were at one of the early conferences, and you were headed up on stage to give your talk. And you got up to the microphone and said, as I was climbing the stairs, I realized the talk I had prepared is not the one I want to give. And then you talked about love the whole time, straight from your heart. And it was so powerful and so beautiful. So I just wanted to thank you for that. And I've loved listening to you today. And your secret is such a gem. So great to see you again. Really good.
Thank you so much.
One thing I would love to hear you say again. I found listening to you really deeply touching, Mavis. And when you described that initial thing of coming to the principles and knowing that, or whatever we're calling it, and knowing that you stumbled on something that was true, but having difficulty in explaining it initially. That's kind of how I feel about listening to you. That there's that I can't exactly explain why, but I just every time I listen to it, it's profoundly touching. And in particular, one story I heard you tell before, when Mary, my dear friend Mary, who's on this call too, interviewed you, and you spoke about another young guy in prison who had been abandoned by his family. And I wondered if you'd tell that story, because it struck me that the ripple effect of that, whatever you taught those guys had touched each of them, but it also went on to touch me, and I'm sure other people listening to that call.
Oh, I haven't thought about that for a long time. One day in class, there was a new kid, and he was from the south side of Chicago. And usually when somebody new came in, we'd just chat a little bit, and I'd have him tell the rest of the kids a little about himself. And he, the south side of Chicago, I don't know if it's still there. There used to be a public housing project called Cabrini Green, and it just turned into just a disastrous, crime-ridden neighborhood, and that's where he lived. And he came home from school one day when he was about 10, I guess, and his family was gone. His mom and his brothers and sisters were gone, and nobody knew where they were, and they never came back. So he was just, he'd been abandoned. And somehow he found his way. He'd sleep in friends' places or whatever, and that went on, and he was just on his own since he was 10. And the way he was telling this story to the kids was that he was a bad kid. He used to throw rocks and get in fights and steal stuff. And the intimation in that was that his mom left him behind because he was just a rotten little person. And I was just about to kind of correct him about that, but one of the other kids said, "Robbie, you're not a bad person. Your mama just didn't know how to be a good mama."
Wow.
And I'm telling you, I can't tell you how many times kids have just stunned me with, just a simple truth. And Robbie, who was kind of a motor mouth, he just, blah, 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 he couldn't think of a thing to say. But the other kids said, yeah, Robbie, you just didn't know how to act any better than that. And your mama she didn't know how to be a good mom. And it was like, who's the counselor here? It's like, but that's the point, isn't it? Isn't it? If we're, no matter where we are and who we are and what our circumstances are, if we're not here to help one another, I just kind of don't get the whole plan. If that isn't the plan, I don't get it. But that little guy, that little Robbie wrote to the governor to tell him that he should teach everybody what he's learning in prison.
Mm.
The governor wrote back. It's like, he showed me the letter. Robbie showed me the letter he wrote, and it was misspelled, and it was just hilarious. And the governor wrote back this sweet letter telling him how nice it was to hear from him, and he was glad he was doing better. I just love life.
You know, as we're getting close to ending, we have a little bit more than 5 minutes, I think, or so. There are two things I wanted you to just talk about. As we chatted the other day, you used one of my old South Dakota expressions, and you said, "Holy cow." And I want you to talk about, because it relates to this whole thing of how you see this understanding or the way we are made as human beings in the context of, you know, the whole universe. Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I get help from a lot of places, and this, a few years ago, maybe 3-4 years ago, I get the Sierra Club magazine, and on the back page there was this photograph that just took my breath away, and it was a picture of a great big turtle. I think it was from Ecuador, and around the turtle's eyes there were a bunch of brilliant colored little butterflies. And I thought, what is that? And I read the caption, and underneath it said, these turtles, there's some minerals in these turtles' tears that the butterflies need for their reproductive process. And in return, the turtle gets its eyes cleaned. Who thought that up? I mean, holy cow, that is amazing. And that's just one tiny, tiny little part of creation. Imagine what we are. We are made of that universal intelligence, that divine fabric that all life is made of. And we really need to have some respect for that. We really need to see who we really are is made of God dust or whatever. It's like, we're not what we think. We're not what we do. We're not where we come from. We're not our pasts. We're not our futures. We are pure potential in a form. And we create our experience. What a privilege. What an amazing design we are. It's the turtle and the butterfly thing. There's not a flaw in the whole thing. It's, how could you not just be in awe of that? And maybe another word for that universal intelligence is love. Not personal affection. Way bigger than that. Love is the only word I can come up with because there isn't a bigger one than that. But fear not. You're already everything you need to be. That was taken care of a long time ago. Just let go of everything that doesn't feel like love. You didn't need it. I wish I could see all of you, but hello.
Hello. Mavis, thank you.
You're welcome.
You said thoughts do not come from our brain.
No, they don't. Isn't that amazing? We are made so that we can have a thought that didn't originate in our brain. Where does that come from? Isn't that amazing? What do you make of that? It's like, and that's every single day. We have a thought that didn't originate in our brain. It comes to our brain. Music, inventions, pieces of wisdom.
And we feel that.
We feel it.
We live from that.
We're feeling the creating we're doing all the time. You don't have an emotion that isn't on your side. The worst one you have is on your side. It's just saying, this is how it feels to think this way. Even if you don't know what you were thinking, doesn't matter. You don't need to know what you were thinking, just that you were, and that you're never not thinking. You can wake up from a thinking hangover, otherwise known as a bad dream. We're always feeling our thinking, and isn't that perfect? Isn't that perfect?